Hi, how you doing? Welcome back to my channel. So I've decided to start a new series. It's a little experiment, it's a little something different, just a little bit of fun that I hope you guys are going to really enjoy. The title is a work in progress, but basically I'm going to be doing kind of like a top 10s situation where I talk about my top 10 albums of all time, my top 10 thrash metal albums, melodic death metal albums, decades, so my top 10 favourite albums from the year 2000 or the year 2017 or 1986 and things like that. So basically top 10s of genre, decade, singers, drummers, guitarists, you name it, top 10s. Will I just call it top 10s? Yeah, I'm just going to call it top 10s, that makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, let's just run with that. Top 10s, new series, top 10s. I'm going to stop saying top 10s, I've said that quite a lot. So just a little bit of fun to begin with. I am going to be talking about the 10 albums that got me into metal. Now, these are the 10 albums that I basically started my journey on. They're not my top 10 albums of all time, although a couple of them might also branch into that category. But my top 10 albums of all time will be a future video, but for now, these are the 10 albums that actually got me into metal and started my journey into the heavy metal genre to begin with. So I've been a long time metalhead for over 20 years now, and it's not just the music that I enjoy, although I do enjoy the music on a very deep personal level, as we all probably do. But it's also the lifestyle, so the live shows, the merch, the community, making friends who are also into metal so you can talk about it until you're blue in the face. I love all that stuff, which is why I started the YouTube channel to begin with. It's just that unlimited supply of the heavy good stuff. You know, metal has got me through the good times, it's got me through the bad times, it's got me through the what in the Alice in Wonderland is this madness and what is going on crazy times. So I'm going to take a little journey down memory lane to talk about my top 10 albums that got me into metal in the first place as a wee teenager. Again, this is not my top 10 albums of all time, just to save any confusion. These are just the top 10 albums that actually got me into metal in the first place. These are in no particular order whatsoever either. I am absolutely terrible at ranking things that I love personally. I have a hard enough time doing my album rankings, never mind my album of the year, so I'm not going to make things deliberately difficult for myself by specifically ranking my top 10s. My top 10s are my top 10, and I'm just leaving it at that. Yeah, I already punished myself enough as it is. So first off, I am starting off strong with Slayer, Rain and Blood, which was released in 1986. Now, at the tender age of 17, I went to my very first metal show, and that was this one, the Unholy Alliance Chapter 2 tour with Slayer headlining, supported by Lamb of God, In Flames, Children of Bodom and Thine Eyes Bleed. And as a wee 17-year-old, this completely blew my mind. I had never been to a metal show before that wasn't local bands from my high school that were playing. This was my first proper big metal show, and it just went completely downhill from there. Now, from what I remember, the first time I discovered Slayer, I was reading about them in Kerrang magazine, and I went to my local independent record shop at the time, which I picked up a copy of this album, and I studied this album relentlessly for a good few months before I went to see them live. Angel of Death, Criminally Insane, Altar of Sacrifice, Rain and Blood. This is just an absolutely stellar record, and that's why I'm starting off with it first. I'm starting off strong with Slayer's Rain and Blood, and that was very impressionable on me as a wee 17-year-old. Speaking of things that were very impressionable on me, the next entry I have is Linkin Park with Hybrid Theory, which was released in 2000, and to say that I was absolutely obsessed with this record is a complete understatement. I played this relentlessly, specifically when I was sitting in my wee dark bedroom playing the PlayStation 2. I remember discovering the band when I watched their music video for One Step Closer. And like I said, I played this record to absolute death, and even over 20 years later, it hasn't lost its edge, and it is absolutely amazing. Paper Cut, One Step Closer, Points of Authority, Crawling. This record is just absolutely fantastic. Okay, so next up I have the Deathstars with Termination Bliss, which was released in 2006. Now, I was a bit of a night owl in my last year of high school when I was about 16, 17 years old, and for the subsequent years afterwards. I used to sit in my bedroom doing my homework at stupid o'clock in the morning in my weird procrastinating way that I do. And that's how I actually discovered coffee. I started drinking coffee religiously from about 15, 16-ish onwards to compensate for the fact that I was up all night trying to get my homework done for the following day. Anyway, I remember I used to watch the music video channel Scuzz relentlessly, especially really late at night or very, very early in the morning. That, 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. used to be like the golden point where they played the heavier stuff. And that's how I discovered Cyanide by the Deathstars. And I absolutely adore this album. This is a very nostalgic album for me. It reminds me of when I was younger. Cyanide, Blitzkrieg, The Last Ammunition, Virtue to Vice. It's awesome industrial glam metal. Don't let the glam metal put you off because it's very industrial, very synthy, and it's just really, really cool. Okay, so next up, and we all knew that this band and this particular album were definitely going to be making the cut for my top 10 albums that got me into metal in the first place, and that's Fear Factory with Demanufacture, which was released in 1995. So the reason I discovered this band was because of the original Mortal Kombat movie. Now, I was very, very young when that first came out, and I believe it was being aired on Channel 5 in the UK a couple of years after it was released at the cinemas. And I was too young to watch that. I wasn't even a teenager at this point, but I watched it anyway because, I'm a rebel. And I remember hearing this song in the fight scene between Scorpion and Johnny Cage, and I remember thinking to myself, this sounds amazing. What is this song? Now, this was before the days of Google. Yes, I am that old that I remember before Google was actually a thing. And I remember watching the whole movie until the end credits where it listed like what all the tracks were. And that's when I saw Fear Factory with Zero Signal. And I have been a massive fan ever since. Anyone who's follows me online for more than 5 minutes and anyone that knows me in my personal life knows that Fear Factory are my all-time favourite band ever, and Zero Signal is still a track that I play regularly, and Demanufacture is still in my daily rotation. I can't possibly choose a favourite track of this record because I love it. I love the record from beginning to end, completely flawless. Love it, absolutely love it, just can't get enough of it. Now, speaking of flawless records, the next one I have is Lamb of God with Sacrament, which was released in 2006. Now, I actually discovered Lamb of God the night before I went to see them live when they supported Slayer on the aforementioned Unholy Alliance Chapter 2 tour. I'd never heard of Lamb of God before that point. I was very late to the Lamb of God party, but the night before I went to see them in Glasgow support Slayer, I saw Redneck appear on Scuzz, and that's still one of my favourite Lamb of God tracks to this day, and I've adored them ever since. I went back through their discography after I saw them live, and they've been a staple in my daily rotation ever since. I especially loved their new album Omens, and I cannot get enough of this band. They have just been completely consistent and absolutely flawless throughout their career, and I adore them. So after I saw them live with Slayer, I actually went and purchased this album the following day. I believe this was the tour that they were actually promoting their album on, so I snapped that up really quickly. I did not have to be convinced to buy this album. Walk With Me in Hell, Again We Rise, Redneck, More Time to Kill, Pathetic. These are absolutely stellar tracks on a completely flawless record. Okay, so next up is another record that I played to absolute death again, and that was System of a Down with Mezmerize, which was released in 2005. This band is absolutely iconic. Whether you love them or you hate them, you've definitely heard of them, and they're very well known for their absolute absurd insanity and their heavy political themes. Now, it was actually a high school friend of mine that got me into this band in the first place because she was absolutely obsessed with them too. So I would often be spotted gliding up and down the old corridors of my crumbling high school like some sort of weird nerdy spectre, listening to the System of a Down album on the little MP3 player that I had. Does anybody remember like the little torpedo bullet MP3 players, the little silver ones? I think you got them in black as well that you used to get. I think they were like this size, and I think they had a memory of like 256 megabit on it. So if you're lucky, you could maybe cram 40 tracks on this thing. I loved those wee things and I thought they were absolutely brilliant, and I listened to mine to absolute death. BYOB, Revenger, Question, this record was just brilliant and I played it to absolute death. Next up is an album that I have very close to my heart on a regular basis, and that's Killswitch Engage with End of Heartache, which was released in 2004. Now, Killswitch Engage were the second band that I went to see live, and I discovered them thanks to the Resident Evil Apocalypse soundtrack. Now, personally speaking, I think the Howard Jones era of Killswitch Engage is by far the superior era of the band. Don't get me wrong, I have nothing against what they've done before or after with Jesse. I just think, personally speaking, the Howard Jones era is a lot stronger. You know, his vocal range between his brutal growls and his soaring melodic cleans are absolutely stunning, and they just cannot compare. I love this whole album. I'm not going to try and pinpoint any tracks on this in particular because I absolutely adore it. Okay, so next up I have Arch Enemy with Doomsday Machine, which was released in 2005. Now, I can't remember exactly how I discovered Arch Enemy. I just remember stumbling across them as a very naive yet eager teenager, making my way through the metal world. And Angela Gossel's vocals were just absolutely out of this world. They completely blew my mind. I had never ever heard, at the time, I'd never heard female vocals quite like it. Skeleton Dance, Nemesis, My Apocalypse, absolutely fantastic tracks. I adored this album. Okay, my last two entries here, I have Trivium with Ascendancy, which was released in 2005. And I was obsessed with this record, and it's still my favourite Trivium record to this day. I had the poster up on my wall, much to my mother's dismay, and I played this to absolute death. I honestly think that this is their best album, closely followed by Shogun, but I absolutely adore Ascendancy. The artwork for it is absolutely phenomenal, and it's got some of my favourite Trivium tracks on it. Pull Harder on the Strings of Your Martyr, Ascendancy, A Gunshot to the Head of Trepidation, Dying in Your Arms, Rain, Like Light to Flies. All of these are absolutely amazing tracks. Okay, so last up on my list, but by no means least, is probably one of my favourite thrash metal albums of all time, and I personally think this is the band's best album to date, and that's Metallica with Ride the Lightning, which was released in 1984. I honestly think that this is their ultimate record. It is absolutely flawless. I had a wee part-time job as a waitress when I was 15 years old. It was just a wee Saturday job where I would work maybe a maximum of 4 hours on a Saturday afternoon. I absolutely hated it, but we all have to start somewhere, right? And I remember the very first time I got paid, I went out and I bought this album. I think it had already been out by 20 years by this point, but you know, better late than never. And the way I discovered Metallica was actually through the music channel VH1 when I was about 12 years old. They played, I can't remember the exact order, but I remember the songs and they were back to back, one after the other. It was Metallica's One, Iron Maiden, Aces High, and Motorhead, Ace of Spades. And when I was 12 years old, that's how I discovered metal in general to begin with, and that's how I discovered Metallica. And Ride the Lightning is by far my favourite album of theirs, and I honestly think it's the best album. So there you have it, a wee insight into where I started in the heavy metal world as a wee kid, as a teenager, as a young teen, discovering the metal world and delving into all the different bands that were available at the time. If you can comment down below to let me know what you think of the albums that I've listed today, and let me know how you got into metal in the first place and what your intro albums were. If you can like, share, subscribe, I really do appreciate your support. Thank you, and I will see you in my next video very soon.